This is the Voyager keyboard from ZSA. It costs over $350. It's only got 52 keys. It's only got 2 thumb switches on each side. It doesn't use choc spacing between the keycaps. You can't use MX switches in it either. And it's not even wireless. But I absolutely love it. This is an impeccably made piece of hardware. Now I'm going to bore you with some of the finer details in a minute, but first the essentials of what you need to know about the Voyager. The Voyager is a wired only 52 key keyboard and it costs around £365 direct from ZSA. You can get it in black and white, you can get it with US style keycaps, you can get it with international style legends on the keycaps, or you can go with the blank keycaps as I've got here. Switch wise, this takes low profile Kailh choc switches only, and from ZSA you can get linear reds, clicky whites, tactile browns. There's also a plethora of other choc switches that you can put in here as an aftermarket upgrade by yourself, because this is a hot swap keyboard. For the sake of review, I opted for the blank keycaps, the white board, and the red linear switches. Assuming this is in stock when you place your order, you're only looking at 3 to 4 days before it's in your hands. I've come to think of ZSA as like the Apple of the ergonomic split keyboard world, and when you receive the Voyager, that only reinforces that view. It's got this lovely sort of packaging. You've got things like spare keys in here. You've got a keycap puller. You've got a bunch of extra keycaps in there as well. You'll be pleased to know that if you use an alternative layout like Dvorak or Colmac, this time around, unlike the Moonlander, you actually get homing keys for those layouts. So it's really nice to be able to have the right legended key in the right position with a homing bump on it. It also includes this neoprene carry case, which aside from being able to stuff your cables in here, it's also got these 2 little zips either side so you can keep your cables in there. And it's also got this lovely little holder to keep these feet in, which I'll show you in a minute. And look at this. You flip this thing over and it's even got Voyager on the underside of that metal. Now, that might seem like a small detail, but that to me is just indicative of the quality throughout this whole board. There was absolutely no need to go to the trouble of adding Voyager to the back of there, but they have anyway, and I love that. So let me just show you some of the finer details of this board. It's got these PBT keycaps, which are absolutely lovely, and they've got these little tiny windows in there so that the LEDs can show through, and that means I can show you a lovely money shot like this and then turn them off because I'm not 10. You've also got these lovely little channels, that's so that you can get your key switch puller in there nice and easily without marking the surface of the board there. Again, wasn't something that was necessary. It's just been thought about and executed in such an elegant way that you wonder why all keyboards don't do that. Reset switch at the back, so you don't need to worry about sticking, you know, clips, paper clips in there to get your board into bootloader mode or anything like that, or remembering some esoteric combination of keys to get it into bootloader mode. And the bottom of this case is steel too, and you can see here it's just standard crosshead screws that are keeping this steel backing in place. And there's also, look, these tiny little rubberized feet, which just, you can barely see them, and they add maybe 1 millimeter to the height. But these little rubber feet, and there's 4 of them there at different corners, they just stop the board moving at all on your desk. Just a lovely execution. You know, you haven't got these huge feet adding height to the board, and they're barely there. You've got these 2 little LEDs on each side of the board for caps lock and such. So on the bottom of the board here, you can see these 2 little circles, and one's got 1 line and one's got 2 lines. And that's so that, I'm not quite sure why, but these have different spacing. These little feet just pull off. And so you can look at this one with 2 on, and that clips into position there. You can take the one with 1, and that clips into position there. And like that, you've got these super sturdy feet, if you want them, which gives you, you know, some degree of tenting here. And that is rock solid. And these things, you know, you really need to take a bit of force to pull them off. Nothing like as much force as the tripod kit, but I'll show you that in a minute. Even with these linear red switches in, which I usually despise and purposely asked for the red linears for that reason, they sound absolutely great in here. It's got a really sort of clicky-clacky sound that I actually really like. It's not a deal breaker, but one thing that you don't get with the Voyager that you do with the Moonlander is that lovely little chime when you plug it in. Sad trombone. I realise that's not a deal breaker, and it was maybe only me that liked that, but you don't get that with the Voyager. So the Voyager, when it's on your desk, is only like 16.3 I measured it at, millimeters high off the desk to the top of the keycaps. And with the Voyager, the 2 halves, the TRRS lead, and the longest USB lead, and the carry case and all the feet, that weighs in at about 650 grams. So that's the kind of amount that you're going to be taking with you if you got it in your backpack. So I have to say, I don't really have a single negative about the hardware side of the Voyager at all. But before I had it in my hands, I did have some nagging doubts. There's certainly some elephants in the room. Why isn't this board wireless? Why is there only 2 thumb switches? And if I'm used to a small layout, something like the Corn, what the hell am I going to do with that extra row of keys across the top? How do I make good use of that? And the key switches, why are they MX spaced and not choc spaced, being as the fact we're using choc switches in here? Well, let's deal with the wireless side of things first. There is no wireless version of the Voyager. It's a wired keyboard. It uses a TRRS cable to go between the 2 halves and a USB-C lead to go from the Voyager to the computer. You get 3 different lengths of USB-C lead, so you should be able to something that suits your situation. It runs QMK firmware, which you sort of operate via the Oryx configurator in the web. Now, ZSA themselves has made a blog post detailing why they don't use wireless on their boards. And it's a good read, it's worth going to read. I don't necessarily agree with all of the points raised, and I'll tell you why. I've got a number of ZMK powered wireless keyboards. I do appreciate the wire-free aesthetic, and I've also found ZMK equally as dependable. Although it's wireless, it's pretty much as dependable as a wired board. So could ZSA have made a board this thin, this size, wireless? Well, probably yes. This is a Cornish Zen, which it's a far more boutique keyboard. It's not a mass manufactured board, and this uses choc switches just the same. It is hot swap. It's got choc spaced keys, and it's even got a little LED screen in there, which to be honest I hate. But the fact remains that that is, a very small. Those two keyboards are very comparable in height. The Voyager, definitely a little bit lower. But yeah, they could probably have done it. But the fact is, they haven't. So if wireless is a deal breaker for you, you can probably stop watching this now and go and find yourself a different keyboard. And I'm pleased to say that after a relatively short space of time, there's enough other stuff that I absolutely love about this keyboard that the wireless just didn't become a problem. I think I'd also been harbouring this sort of idea that wireless was wireless was less hassle. But then when you think about it with wireless, there's often situations where you change host machines and you've got to change the source from a different Bluetooth channel to get connected to the other thing. And if you've got something like an Advantage 360, you probably need to sacrifice the odd goat just to get the 2 pairs to connect to each other. So wireless is not without its problems, and there's a certain liberation of being able to just grab your keyboard, plug it in and have it work. But I do understand, wired these days is not going to be for everyone. Mechanical keyboards that use MX style switches use MX style spacing between the keys. That stands to reason. That's the distance between each key to the next. Choc switches, which are these low profile ones used in the Voyager, can be used with what's called choc spacing, and that just means that you get a slightly less distance between the keys. The Voyager does not do that. It uses, although it's got low profile keys, it uses MX style spacing. The nerd in me sort of internally grumbled a little bit about that once I realised it. But here's the practical differences. So take a look at those two. So the Cornish Zen there uses choc size keycaps with choc spacing, and the Voyager on that side has got the MX size keycaps and MX spacing. I measured this and there's only 1mm difference between those two. So the choc spacing on the Corn is about 18mm from the start of one keycap to the start of the next keycap. On the Voyager, it's about 19mm. I'm not able to get much more precise than that with the calipers that I'm using. And over a run of 6 keys, that means that the gap between those equates to about 5mm. So there's a little bit of difference, but again, in terms of practicality, since using this board, before that, for a couple of months, I've been using that Cornish Zen, which I really like, and I got used to the spacing of the keys, and I was expecting this to be a bit of a sort of backward step. But the honest truth is, I just haven't noticed a difference, and I think I'm equally fine with choc spacing, and I'm equally fine with MX spacing in terms of like the speed of typing, it's just not changed at all. Another thing that was concerning me whilst I was waiting for this board to arrive is I was used to more than 2 thumb switches, and also it got this extra row of keys along the top, that you can see here in comparison again with the Cornish set, which is the Corn, which is a very popular keyboard of this type. You can see you've got an extra row, and you've also got 3 thumb switches on the Corn. And because I got used to that, I was a little bit concerned I was going to be able to do everything I needed to do. Well, again, I needn't have worried, because it took a little bit of time. It took a couple of weeks to really hone a layout that I was happy with. But now I've found I don't need those extra thumb keys, and I'm actually using that top row for all my coding symbols. So on the right hand side, I've got all my different brackets across the top, so squares, curlies, and parentheses. And then on the left hand side, I've got things like caps word, plus minus, and the all-important copy-paste. But in order to be able to do that and have that top row, rather than use that top row for modifiers, like your Command, Super, Control, Option, Alt, those sorts of keys, you could put those on the top row if you wanted to. You could also put those on the bottom row and shift your alphas up if you wanted to. But I tried that initially and found that a little bit weird. But I think that the key to getting the most out of a board like this, and any of those really small form factor keyboards, is to get comfortable with using home row mods. Now, I'm assuming that most of you watching this are nerdy enough to know what home row mods are, so if you are that person, you can skip ahead to the next section. But for everybody else, if you're not a social recluse with bad body odor problems, let me give you the sort of York Notes version of what home row mods are. So home row mods are simply the doubling up of keys on your home row, this sort of set of keys along here, to do 2 jobs. Home row mods mean that you change these keys along here, so you tap that and get a normal alpha key, but you hold it in to get control, hold that one in to get option or alt, hold that one in for super or command, and that one is my shift key, and then that one is hyper. That's the essence of home row mods. But for the life of me, when I first got this keyboard, I only before now set up home row mods on ZMK keyboards, which is pretty straightforward to do, works great, never had any real problems. I could not get Oryx to take these home row mods in a sensible fashion. I did everything that I thought was the sensible thing to do, just went into the configurator, made the changes that I expected, flashed it to the board, and it was just chaos. I couldn't even get through a simple typing test without a load of false mod activations, so as I was typing, it kept thinking I wanted to press my command key or my shift key when I didn't. I kept changing the layout, reflashing the board, same thing. So much so that I got to a point of frustration where I put the Voyager to one side and didn't touch it for about a week. So I emailed ZSA about this, and obviously they were great, they were very understanding, they gave me a bunch of things to try, all of which I did try, but I just couldn't get it to work, so I was left with the feeling that QMK and by extension Oryx was just horrible for home row mods. As the time passed, I obviously came to wonder whether it was just an error between keyboard and chair. So one evening I completely destroyed the layout, started again, flashed it to the board, and it just worked. So what I would say to you, if you're the 1 in a million that gets that same problem, home row mods absolutely can work on this board, no problem. I don't know why it didn't for me initially, but that was my experience. But now I've been using it every day since, never had a problem, and it's fantastic. I've been typing on the Voyager without the feet on the bottom for the most part. I just prefer it flat, and it's just a lovely, lovely typing experience. And these days, having got used to things like the Glove 80 and then the Cornish Sen, which have got these low profile choc switches in them, and now the Voyager 2, I find when I go back to something like the Advantage 360, much as I like that board, I'm finding it hard to go back to those longer key press switches. I'm really enjoying these choc switches at the minute. It's kind of like a halfway house between an MX switch and something like an Apple keyboard where there's next to no travel. And I've also found this possibly the comfiest keyboard that I own to type on for long periods of time. And that's coming from somebody who's got keyboards like the Glove 80 and the Advantage 360 keyboards with this keywell, which is, famously and accepted to be the most comfortable way to have your fingers. So despite having keyboards with keywells, I'm saying that I find this slightly comfortable for longer periods of time, so I better qualify why I believe that to be the case. I realise I'm perhaps an outlier here, but I think there's a common sort of maybe myth that's sort of peddled in the keyboard industry that because our thumbs are the strongest digits, we should be loading them up more with more keys, and I've just not found that to be the case. I don't know if I'm genetically shortchanged in this regard, but my thumb just isn't that dexterous. I don't really want more than 2 or 3 thumb keys. I just don't have the ability with my thumb to easily discern where those different switches are. In addition, I wonder whether keyboards that have got this key well, like the Glove 80 and the 360, the Glove 80 to a lesser degree, but I suspect that part of the problem for me is that my hand sits on here, and I have to, it's a bit hard to see here, but essentially my thumb at a resting position has to be slightly raised here, ready to press these keys. I'm a bit heavy-handed, and I think basically with a keywell keyboard I'm having to have my hand in that kind of position, whereas with the Voyager it's more like that, it's just flat. And I think that over a longer period of time is the difference between these thumb joints aching a little bit at the end of a day. So this is a long way of just saying that fewer keys and the flat board I'm actually perfectly fine with, and I'm finding it very comfortable day to day. But let me be quite clear, the most comfortable keyboard, regardless of what I or anybody else says, is the keyboard that's most comfortable for you. And sadly, that probably means trying out a few different styles of keyboard to see which does suit you. Now, one thing I really like about ZSA's other keyboard, the Moonlander, is this built-in palm rest. And what's great about that is as you have your hand on it typing, it really puts your hand in your hand and wrist in a nice flat position like that. Now, even though the Moonlander is nearly twice the thickness of the Voyager, these are about 30mm from the bottom of the feet there to the top of the keycap, compared with the Voyager, which is about 16. So the Voyager is quite a bit slimmer, and the Moonlander was already quite a slim keyboard anyway. Now, even though it is that flat to the ground, it's still potentially, when you've got your hand rested on the deck, on your desk, there's perhaps still a slight incline of your hand and wrist there. Now, that's not been a problem for me at all, but it potentially might be a problem for you. And if that is the case, because there's not anything like the Moonlander's built-in palm rest, what you can do is spend a little bit extra. For $89, what you can get is ZSA's tripod kit. You get 2 of these metal magnetic feet, and you get one ginormous TRRS cable so that it can go between the 2 halves. What's great about this is, unlike the Moonlander, which if you had the Moonlander and the tripod kit for the Moonlander, you had these screws that you needed to mount to. What's so lovely about these on the Voyager is that you can just position these here, so you can see these little nubbins maybe just on the bottom of there, and you can see the holes in the bottom of the Voyager there, and this thing just snaps into place. And I swear, when that's clicked on, the first time I put this on, I didn't know if they put like a tractor beam inside it or something. It's so solid, the magnet in there. I'm going to have to just pause the camera whilst I get this thing off. 2 seconds. So no word of a lie, in order to get this off the bottom of there then, I had to screw it onto this tripod mount here so that I could peel it away. That's how strong the magnets are in these tripod mounting kits. Now, what I don't have here to show you is this setup on my chair, which I'm going to move this along so you can see this here. So, in fact, let me just show you. I've just got here a standard C-clamp with an adjustable ball head tripod mount there. Standard camera equipment. And what I plan to do in time is to get this mounted on the arms of my chair, but the chair I have at the minute is a bit pants and doesn't really allow that, so I've got a bit of work to do there. But I want to show you the principle of this tripod kit in action. So even in this regard, if you wanted a nice tenting setup at your desk, even if you don't want it attached to your chair, then you can use something like clamps like this on the desktop, and it's as easy with this Voyager kit of being able to just click this thing onto the bottom there like that, and then this thing, I mean, I am whacking that, and the only thing that's budging here is the tripod mount, the ball head of the tripod. The actual connection to the Voyager is absolutely solid. So you can set this and have whatever kind of tenting angle you want, because basically this sort of sky's the limit of these sort of ball head tripod parts. And the good thing about it this time is that if you want to move to a kind of just a perfectly flat version, unlike before where you need to unscrew stuff, with the Voyager you can literally just pull it off and plonk it down on your desk and carry on as you were. ZSA's Oryx suite of applications is still perhaps the most complete set of tools to get the most out of an ortholinear keyboard. It's the fact that you've also got tools that you can use in there to test your typing with things like prose, with code. You know, if you've never had a split keyboard before, the first time you use it for a few days, it can really feel like you've made the wrong decision. But having some tools there to give you the feedback and see, so you know, you can start to feel your progression from hunting and pecking at like 5 or 6 words per minute, and over the weeks and months progress to actually being able to be productive with it. That's made very, very much easier by this Oryx suite of software that comes part and parcel of owning a Voyager or any of ZSA's other keyboards. And once you get into fine-tuning your layout, as you get used to the board, tools like the heat map are very useful, and that lets you sort of analyse the keys that you are actually using all the time as opposed to what you think you're using all the time. And that's a very good tool to be able to then tweak your layout and make sure that the keys that you use the most are actually gravitating towards that home row, so you're having to do less movement, more economical movement with your hands day to day. Getting firmware from Oryx onto your keyboard is super simple. It's literally just a press of that reset switch on the back of the Voyager, sends the file across. It's all just done straight from Oryx. If you're not able to use a Chromium-based browser like Chrome, Edge, you can download ZSA's Keymap application, and that runs as a separate application, gives you all the same sort of tools. You don't get the configurator built in, but you do get things like the heat map, and it's also got that lovely tool where you can see your current layout as you're using the board. And that's particularly useful once you start off with a board like this, because as you switch layers, the key map changes live as you're using it, so you can see, that's where I put the backslash or whatever key it is that you're struggling to find. And crucially, the key map application also lets you flash your firmware. Alright, so look, no keyboard, no product is perfect. I'm going to tell you a couple of little things that I've found slightly annoying with the Voyager. Waking from sleep is occasionally a problem for me. I'm using Mac OS, and I tend to have my keyboards here wired into this Dell monitor that I've got that's got built-in KVM, and like 95% of the time it's absolutely fine, no problems. But occasionally I'll click a key on the Voyager, it'll wake up my computer, and I'll go to enter the password, and none of the keys after the initial wake actually do anything. It's easy enough to work around. I just pull the USB cable out the back, plug it back in, and everything is fine. Spoken to ZSA about this. It's seemingly a problem with some USB hubs. Certainly when I've tried this in an office connected directly to an iMac, that's not been a problem at all. So unlikely that most people are going to come across that, but obviously for me it can be irritating from time to time. If there is a limitation for this board, it's probably at this point QMK. There's a couple of little things that I tried to do with Oryx and QMK that I just wasn't able to do, which is easy peasy in ZMK. For example, with ZMK you can have a key which is a shifted brace on tap and a hold to get you hyper. You can't do that with QMK, or I certainly haven't found out a way to do that easily with QMK. With ZMK, you just do it, there's no problems at all. Obviously that's not a big deal, you can just work around that problem. But again, when you've got other boards using other firmware where that's not a problem, it does make you start to think, well, that shouldn't really be a problem, especially on a board with so few keys. Making economical use of those keys is pretty important. I'd also really like it if there was some better utility for these little LEDs that we've got on each side of the board. It would be nice, for example, if when I choose caps word, the caps lock symbol came up for the duration of that being active. That would be quite useful. But quite honestly, that's about it, and I'm kind of scraping the barrel looking for problems with this board. Usually the problems come to you, and in this case I'm sort of going looking for things to tell you about that I don't think are particularly good. So look, the bottom line is, this keyboard nails exactly what it set out to do. If you don't need wireless, and realistically you probably don't, I think this is an absolute cracking keyboard. It's got a lovely form factor, it's easy to travel with, you've got the built-in little feet that you can attach and take off with ease. You've got the optional tripod kit if you want some more dramatic tenting. There's no sort of spring ping or anything like that in this board, even though it's got what I consider the worst of the choc switches in this one I've been testing, which is the red switches. It's got a nice sort of clacky feel, and it feels absolutely solid in use. And you know, if you don't like the key switches, it's easy peasy to swap them out. And if you're new to these kind of keyboards, you couldn't find a better suite of software to help ease that transition than the Oryx software that comes with the ZSA boards. It really is kind of top of the class in terms of the tools that it makes available to you. Now, if you've got a larger board currently, something like the Moonlander, you might be wondering if this is a board that you can sensibly transition to. Well, I'm living proof that you can. I tend to err on the side of having more keys rather than more layers, but in a couple of months' time, I've managed to transition away from a full-size sort of 70 plus keys keyboard to using something like this or the Korn quite successfully, and I'm now quite comfortable with that. There was certainly a difficult transition period, but you get through it and it's absolutely fine. But what about if you've got a conventional keyboard and you're trying to weigh up whether to go for something like the Voyager or something like the Moonlander? Well, quite honestly, in your situation, I would probably say go for the Moonlander. And the reason for that is that if you're going from something like a conventional board with conventional staggered keys, there's enough things going to be changing when you move to a split column-based keyboard that I don't think you want the extra complication of needing to use layers and home row mods and things of that nature. I would probably say in that instance you'd be better suited going for a Moonlander. Equally, exactly the same sort of suite of software that you get with it. A really, really, really good board in its own right. It just has more of those keys, so you can map what you have already and what you're used to more easily to the Moonlander than you could to something like the Voyager. Now, if you currently have something like a Korn or a Ferry Sweep, something of that nature, maybe something that you've built yourself, I think you'll probably love this Voyager. You'll almost certainly, given a bit of time, find a decent use for that top row that you won't be used to if you've got something like a Korn that only has 3 rows. I've certainly found things that I find very useful to put there now, which I didn't anticipate that I would. So, to wrap this up, ZSA absolutely nailed it with this keyboard. Yes, it's not wireless. Yes, there's only 2 thumb keys on each side, and yeah, it's got MX spacing for the keys rather than choc. That doesn't matter. This is an absolutely brilliant keyboard, and I'd be very surprised if you got yourself one of these and you didn't like it. I just think it's a phenomenal product. Thanks for watching. I'm probably going to try and wind down doing as many of these keyboard reviews now, as I'm a bit sick of looking at keyboards. Reviewed a lot of keyboards over the last year, and I'm coming to the point where I want to wind that down and start looking at some different sorts of products. If there's anything you particularly want to see reviewed or looked at, or topics, whether you like the NeoVim stuff, things of that nature, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear feedback from you and know what sort of stuff that you have found useful. Hopefully something. Otherwise, I'll see you again in the next one.